In Mark chapter 6 is a familiar story of Jesus feeding the 5,000. One of the interesting aspects of this particular story is the way that it begins. The people have been listening to Christ. The disciples are kind of bothered by that. They tell Christ, send them away, but instead he doesn't. And then what are they going to do? Because it's getting late, it's time to eat, and there needs to be food. And so the disciples come to Christ, and they ask him about this. And his response is very interesting in Mark chapter 6, in verse 37. Instead of Christ just miraculously coming up with food for the 5,000, he says to the disciples, you give them something to eat. You give them something to eat. Now, when we see the whole scenario of this story, the disciples had just recently come back from being sent out 2 by 2. They were preaching the gospel. They were being a witness for God's way. They were to be that shining light. Now we come to this story, and he's telling them to consider what they should do in a case like this. In a sense, Christ is teaching them, have faith. Look to God. What would you do if Christ put you in this situation? You give them something to eat. Now, obviously, their first thought was, wait a second, how are we supposed to do that? There's not a Walmart nearby. There's nothing like that we can just instantly come up. How is that going to happen? So at first, they looked to their own means. But Christ was teaching them a lesson. He was teaching them to look beyond their own means to God. What can we do when we look to God? God may direct us to do the practical thing, the thing that would be helpful in a specific situation. What do you have on hand? But sometimes we become limited by that when we just look to our own selves and our own capabilities. In this story, Christ wants them to look beyond themselves, to look to Him, to look to God for the ultimate solution in this situation. So I think that's a great reminder for us. When you read about the feeding of the 5,000, think about, well, before I run to someone else or try to solve my own problems, let's look to God. Let's ask God, what would you have me do? That's PT Daily. We'll see you next time.